Good morning. It's Tuesday, January 3rd. And you know how when you read something or you see something, it triggers a group of memories? Well, that's what happened to me yesterday. I was sitting there trying to find something to rant about today when I came across this article. This article dealt with a couple of artists who have an exhibition going on right now at the Bronx Museum of Art. Now, when I was a kid and I grew up in the Bronx and I lived in several of the places that these guys talk about in this article. But in any event, I don't ever remember the Bronx Museum of Art when I was a kid. It happens to be on the Grand Concourse, a couple of blocks from Yankee Stadium. But that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about this exhibition that's taking place there. This is an exhibition by two artists. And they're not well known in the world of great artists. They're not Picasso or somebody like that. They're good artists. They paint and they sculpt. One of them, whose name is Rigoberto Torres, and the other's name is John Ahern. And Torres grew up in the Bronx, lived in the Bronx, and practices his art in the Bronx. And Ahern met him somehow, and they became friends, and they decided they're going to collaborate on this series of paintings and sculpture, which they make a lot of sculptures in plaster, and then they paint over them. And what these sculptures and paintings depict is the community that they're living in. They are creating paintings and sculptures of their neighbors, essentially. And that's what this exhibition is all about. It's the real life people who live in the neighborhood. Not famous people, not the typical art world people, not celebrities, not politicians, just regular people who live in that area of the Bronx, which I am sure right now is much different than it was when I was living in the Bronx. And the thing that got me interested in this article and everything is that it was Walton Avenue. And I lived on Walton Avenue and 183rd Street. So let me tell you a little bit about Walton Avenue. At the time, the first thing I really remember was how I split open my eye on the Johnny Pump, because all the kids used to hop over this Johnny Pump on the corner. You know what a Johnny Pump is? It's a fire hydrant. And somehow or other I missed it and I hit my eye, and I remember ending up with a patch over my eye and a couple of stitches. Yes, that was right on the corner. And on that very corner there was a newsstand attached to a candy store. And every morning when people went to work, they would go down 183rd Street to the Jerome Avenue line. And on their way by, the newsstand would have all the papers out there. The Daily News, the Mirror, the Times, the Journal American, the World Telegram. All of those newspapers, probably half of them don't exist anymore. But they were pennies. 2 cents for the Daily News or something. And people would walk by and take a newspaper and throw 2 cents in a little cigar box. Nobody worried about it. Everything was okay. You could do that. And across the street from that newsstand was a delicatessen. And I remember when I got to be a little bit older, I was allowed to go to the movies by myself, which was the Oxford Theater on 183rd and Jerome Avenue. And I would get a quarter. And I would go into the delicatessen, have 2 hot dogs and a Pepsi-Cola. And I still had enough money to go down the hill and pay the 7 cents to get into the Oxford Theater to watch the movie. And at the age of 5, I would walk to school. In fact, when I was 4 and a half, I started walking to school. Because all of my friends were a little bit older than me, so they went into kindergarten 6 months ahead of me. And my mother was distressed because there I was out alone in the world. And you know what she did? She went down to the school and she talked to them about putting me in the kindergarten class because I had nobody left to play with. And they took me in. So I spent a year and a half in kindergarten. Imagine that. Imagine getting left back in kindergarten. Well, it wasn't quite getting left back, but in any event, that's what happened. And that school was PS 33 on Walton Avenue. And you could come into that school from Walton Avenue or on Jerome Avenue. So this school was a block wide, right? And it was built in something like 1895 or something like that. And I thought it was very old at that point, right? You know what? I checked the map before I started this rant. That school is still standing. And then, of course, there was Fordham Road and the trolley cars, you know. So when you got a little bit older, you walked down the Fordham Road. was 183rd, then there was 184th, and then the next street over was Fordham Road, where the trolley cars were. And where you could get on the trolley car and go visit your relatives who lived on Southern Boulevard in the Bronx. Of course, you had to change trolleys at the Bronx Zoo to catch the Southern Boulevard trolley. But it was great. It was great. That was what it was. That's what you lived. You lived. And you know what else I had on Walton Avenue? On Walton Avenue in the middle of the street was this big white building. The only building on the street with an elevator. And I had a friend, Ronnie Schiff, who lived in that building. And it was exciting to go to visit him, to go home with him after school or before, because I rode in the elevator. You know, the apartment buildings that I lived in, which was 2301 Walton Avenue and 2310 Walton Avenue, they were walk-ups. You know, everybody walked up. Luckily for me, in both of those cases, we didn't live high up. We lived on the first floor in 2310. I don't remember exactly what floor we were living on in 2301, but we didn't have to walk up. But Ronnie Schiff lived in the elevator building. And you know what else was exciting when you went to Ronnie Schiff's apartment? He had a drop-down living room. You had to go down 2 steps to get into the living room. Nobody lived like that, you know? Nobody. But he was a high-class guy and a nice kid and a good friend of mine. Another good friend of mine was Gerson's Wyckoff. Gerson's father owned a linoleum store that was on 183rd Street. And we would go over there sometimes in the afternoon and cut up pieces of linoleum so we could use them on our zip guns, you know, the gun you made out of an orange crate with a rubber band. But I tell you, shooting pieces of linoleum around was dangerous, because if you got hit with a piece of linoleum in the corner, it could stick in your head. So I remember all those things, and it was triggered by the mere fact that there's an art museum in the Bronx. And it's a good thing that we have an art museum in the Bronx. And the interesting thing is that this art museum and what these people are portraying are the people who are living in that section of the Bronx right now. And I don't think it's the same section of Walton Avenue that I grew up on. I think it was a little bit further south of me, because they considered it to be the South Bronx. But Walton Avenue ran a long way, you know. You could walk down Walton Avenue and get to the Yankee Stadium. That's what I remember about the Bronx. The great streets like Tremont Avenue and Fordham Road and Southern Boulevard and Jerome Avenue. And the movie theaters, the Grand, the Paradise, the RKO Fordham, the Valentine. I remember all those things, and I remember them fondly. It was great growing up in the Bronx. And I'll leave you with that this morning, the strange things that trigger youthful memories. Have a great day. Bye.